right. Well, good morning.
Morning.
I'm excited to introduce to you today a well-known local author, Cecil Moore. Mr. Moore has our local bestseller right now. It's selling like hotcakes out here. It's called The View from the Other Side of the Tracks. And it is a book about the history of North Marshall County, primarily the Little Cypress community. That's one part of the book, just about his life. It also contains an autobiography written by his mother, Mrs. Irene Nuckols Moore. She kept a diary all of her life. She grew up in Epperson, was that correct? That's around Reedland.
Yeah, Reedland.
Yeah. And her family worked on the railroad. So a lot of interesting insights about that. But the name of her autobiography is I Lived by the Railroad All of My Life. But going back to the book, it contains Mr. Moore's memories of growing up in the river community of Little Cypress. They were all very hard workers. They farmed. I think his mother kept like 500 chickens at one time and tended to them on her own. But probably even more importantly to some of us here in this audience, Mr. Moore is a wonderful genealogist and has studied many, many families in the Marshall County and Livingston County area. And a lot of us are related to Mr. Moore through either the McDonalds or the Stringers, the Baileys. And so a lot of that information is contained in his book. Mr. Moore is a lifelong resident of Marshall County, with the exception of 10 years that he spent living in Lyon County in the Sodden Hills. Is that correct? 10 years. He is nearly a 50-year employee, is that correct, of ISP/Ashland. So they're all hard workers. That was one thing I came away from this book, is that his family, they are some working people. And so I'm not going to continue on, but I do want to introduce Mr. Moore and welcome you to speak to us today.
Catherine, I appreciate that introduction, and I'm gratified to be here. And that people show up that share an interest in history and genealogy. It's good to see you here, and I want to thank this organization for allowing this beautiful setting here for this to be put on. This is perfect. All the history here, the Livingston County's been here a long time, and I see the.
Mr. Moore, could you speak up just a little bit?
Okay. Well, okay, that's not on this.
No, it's not fine today.
All right. Let me get some of this then. I remember this as a guy that was starting out preaching, and there was a preacher that could really preach a long time, and he asked him how he done it, and he said, well, that I got on the desk there, that's not water. But he said, I'll tell you one thing you got to be careful of. He said, Daniel didn't just slay the lion and kick his butt all over the mountainside, so he got carried away. So anyway, I'm gratified and that you're here. Catherine Boswell for introducing me. Like she said, related to the McDonalds and Stringers. My grandmother was a McDonald, and her daddy was William Henry Stringer. They came to Marshall County later, and I bought a farm that he lived on later on the river. And I remember Leslie McDonald was my grandmother's cousin. They were about the same age. And I can remember him when I was really young visiting the Moores when he'd come out of Livingston County and maybe headed for Paducah down the river road, he would visit the Moores. So I was familiar with him. My mother, Irene Knuckles, was born in 1914, and we put a 1930 dress on her. That's her face. And like Catherine said, she wrote the book, I Lived with the Railroad All My Life. And then this is me with a view from the other side of the tracks. And that title bears out in several different places in the book. She would kept a diary all her life, and I think at that point, I'll ask Patty Coakley. Now Patty, I call it a labor of love, because she took Mama's diary and helped her put it together, and it was never published, helped her put it together. And Patty taught school in Marshall County, Livingston County, Grand Rivers, I know. And would you, she'd tell a little bit about her part of it.
As far as Cecil and I know, I don't think we're kin, but I feel like I'm part of his family, whether he likes it or not. Irene, his mother, approached me at one point and said, you know, I have recorded my story, and said, do you know anybody that could type it for me? I jumped at the opportunity because I love to read people's stories. I really do. And as far as Livingston County is concerned, I lived in Grand Rivers till I was 4, went to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, came back to Paducah, and then I've been in Grand Rivers some since. But I taught school one summer in all the elementary schools. I was teaching physical education at that time. If you have your book, there is a page, it's called VII 7, right there, and that's my name at the bottom, because that explains how I felt about Irene. She was such a delight. She just has the greatest sense of humor and passed it on to him, okay? But I had the opportunity to sit and listen to her stories about what life was like when she was growing up. Her mother died when she was 12. Her sister got married like a year and a half or 2 years later and left Irene in charge of the house and the father, and a younger sister and a younger brother. I think he was younger. I believe that's right. At any rate, she grew up trying to take care of a family of people that didn't have a mother. And so at some point she had to quit school in order to do it all. So she did. But it was such a delight. One of the stories that she shared that really touched me, because when we moved back to Paducah when I was 10, there was a fellow that worked at the courthouse in McCracken County. And his first name was Lonnie, and everybody called him Lonnie. He worked in the hallway of the courthouse in a booth selling candy and whatever else he could. And that was in 1951, in the 50s, that he was working there. When I started doing her stories, on page 9 of the book, Lonnie used to always remind me us of the things we did. He told me when I was about 7 or 8 years old, me and my little friends would play church upstairs. Everybody picked me to be the preacher, so I would get a geography book and preach from it. you've probably had some kind of experience similar to that yourself. But Lonnie was blind. He wasn't born blind, but he was blind when I knew him. And he would go to blind school in the winter and come back and live with them in the summer. And she talks about how he treated she and her siblings and how sweet and how good he was to them. So that's just a personal story that I really enjoyed. She talks about her in-laws and how much she loved her in-laws, Mama and Papa Moore. And then she talks about one of the farms that she lived on because she needed a place to live. And when they lived there, she took care of the flowers that the previous owner had taken care of. And she talks about all the different flowers and how she took care of them. It's just a delightful book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Now, I'm also a genealogist, and I've done quite a bit of genealogy in this area and up in Union County and Henderson and Webster County. But this book, if you are a genealogist or have any inkling about being one or finding out about your family's history, you need to read the last part of this book because it takes one family after another. I don't know if you ever heard of the name Kuykendall. Kuykendall. Okay. There's a section in here about the Kuykendalls that ended up in Marshall County. My first inclination about a Kuykendall was in Union County, where my grandmother and my mother grew up. There's a tiny little cemetery in a little cluster of woods, and it's a Kuykendall cemetery. It's just people that were named Kuykendall that were buried there. At any rate, it's a very personal book about families, and I think you would be highly informed and probably will find someone in here you know or did know or are part of your ancestry. So I highly recommend it. Cecil has done one fine job of getting information together for other people. Thank you. Your turn.
Appreciate that, Patty Coakley. Like I say, it was a labor of love that was exhibited and what she done in helping my mother put all that together. As a story in the book, I'm looking at him back here, David Hughes, y'all know him probably, that he's kin to the Lampleys and was doing the Lampley genealogy. And Jimmy Lampley was on the state championship 1959 team that won the state tournament at Memorial Coliseum in Lexington. And the second game of the tournament, we played Mason County. And Dale Hughes, he's traveling. He claims he's retired, but he's traveling all over the world now. And he was in Maysville, Mason County, and putting in some scales, working on scales. And there's a guy come up to him. He said, you look exactly like and walk exactly like a guy that I played against when we played Marshall County in 1959, the state tournament. And David said, well, I had an uncle, Jimmy Lampley, that played on that team. And he said, well, I'll tell you one thing, he was the meanest ball player I've ever seen. He was the leading scorer for Maysville. We went beating about 15 points. I mean, they had a good ball club. And he was the leading scorer, and they put Jimmy on him, and the first thing he done is he stuck his fingers in his eyes when he started to shoot, and he got a foul called on him. And all he had to do after that is just act like he was going to stick his finger in his eyes. He was ducking, and he wound up scoring a lot less points than he normally would have scored, so I probably helped him. And Jimmy Lampley wound up scoring more points than anybody in the state tournament that year. I think it's 80 or 85 points back then. So I seen that. And I don't know where Darrell Lampley is. He should be here. He's from Marshall County. And Darrell Lampley, I wrote the history of Marshall's IGA in Possum Trot, and he started to work there when he was 15 years old. And he worked till they just closed it, 3 or 4 months ago, probably. Closed the IGA. And he was still working there. And he still talked the same. He walked a little bit different than he did when he first went to work there, but he's a Livingston County resident. My early memories of Livingston County, I was over on the other side, the land of the Chickasaws. I was looking over the land of the Chickasaws, then the Ohio, the Shawnee and Tecumseh and Tasmingo and the Chickasaws on that side. And, I was hunting artifacts all the time, the Indians, and trying to imagine what it would be like to be there at that time. I used to think about a time machine. We've seen that one movie about a time machine, take you back, in that time frame, the paleo area, archaic woodland areas, different, 10,000, 8,000, 6,000 years ago. But I wouldn't want them to see me if I was back there just watching, see how they was doing. I'd be afraid. They'd probably be afraid of me if they seen me too. But the first, I was 12 years old. My brother Gerald was 16, and we had a new Alice Chalmers 45 and a new combine. We was farming over in Marshall County. And Daddy knew a guy over here in Livingston County, and he talked him into coming over and combining his fescue. And we got on the farm, and of course I would know these guys a lot better later. One of them was Jackie Gerard. Am I pronouncing that right? Gerard. Drew worked with my son Drew Moore. He worked with him at ISP. And I remember Jackie had an older brother, and he'd run around on a horse. I mean, a beautiful horse. He'd just keep circling where we had already combined the fescue, And I think he died shortly after that, his older brother, and I never did know what his name was. But Jackie had 3 boys that went to work there at ISP, GF in Calvert City. One of them we call Howie Gerard, y'all probably know them. And I can't remember the other, you might remember one more of them.
Tim and Chad, I think, was the other brothers.
Okay. Chad and
Tim.
Okay. And what I remember, it took us a half a day to get that combine over here. And I don't know if we come from the Rayland area or we come from the other side. I can't remember which way we come in, but it took us half a day to get here. And we was combining fescue. I mean, it was really heavy. I was tying them sacks, scooting them off in chutes. And I thought it was 100 miles an hour. And I looked up and I seen my dad walking up the riverbank and a neighbor over there with him. And I thought, how'd that happen? Well, we could just cross the river. We lived across the river, and I didn't know where I was over there. And we done one other farm over here, and I can't remember that guy's name. It wasn't far from there. So the book, The View from the Other Side of the Tracks, Leslie MacDonald, I was fascinated with the work that he done, Leslie MacDonald. my friends have him and do this. Of course, I expanded on the genealogy. You know, we got more tools today in the genealogy. We can see further back in different places, but, you know, I was able to take the McDonald's way on back, you know, into Scotland, and the Stringers way back, and all of them, you know, way back. The Baileys that's sitting out here, you know, they was a rough bunch. I mean, Shorty's brothers, I tell you what they done for recreation. What they do for entertainment, they ride mules. They didn't, and they wouldn't put saddles on them. They just put a rope around their neck, and they'd ride them over to Big Cypress Creek on the river, and they'd jump them off in bluffs into the creek, and then swim them out. That's how tough they were. And the Moores always tried to stay on the good side of the Baileys. All they could, or get out of their way one, you know, one of them. But Lola and Mary Frances, Shorty, and all of them helped me put that Bailey part together. You know, we brought them out of England and down to you know, they was part of the Boston Tea Party and the Revolution, and tempered all the way down into Marshall County on a Bailey land grant. And then they bought another land grant from the Stories, the middle part of the Story land grant. So I appreciate you letting me talk about the book a little bit. I don't want to dwell on it, but if you're interested, I'll try to get them. I've sold several hundred of them, and I'm getting ready to order 200 more. I'm going to order a few hardbacks, and then we're working on an audio book now. And getting a lot of demand and calls for truck drivers, you know, they like to listen, you know, to the audio. And I'm looking at, of course, my grandkids and great grandkids, you know, amazing grandkids. You know, I'm talking to them about how we do this, and the author house will send me the equipment. And then some people's got their own equipment, but we're looking at AI, artificial intelligence now. Now they can read this book in about 5 minutes and audio it in about 5 minutes, AI. And I don't know, AI may take over one of these days. So I appreciate your attendance here, and I'll talk to you later. If has anybody got any questions?
I'm particularly interested in the Stringers, and I was wondering what your sources are. Could I have access to your sources? Stringers.
Yeah, I know, but what do you say about it?
Your sources, what were your sources for the Stringers?
Ancestry and My Heritage,
Okay.
Family Search,
Okay.
and it's one other, and I looked at all of them, but now I'm gonna tell you, it's no telling how many mistakes that are made in genealogy. And
Oh, yeah.
when you're relying on somebody else, you know. Now, you know, my lines, you know, I try to, you know, look at them a little bit harder, you know, but I know telling how many mistakes I've made.
I was hoping I could have access to them, but I've got all that.
Yeah, you've got all
Yeah.
that, right? You know how to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
The Stringers, we got them a pretty good ways back. And of course, the Revolutionary War hero, Leonard Stringer, and he cashed in his war bond, 1,500 acres on Powell and Sugar Creeks. And of course, Leslie McDonald had a lot of information on that too, where he George Washington occupied the same pulpit as John Wesley, and you know, he had a lot of information there, but maybe I can do better on the next question. Everybody, okay.
Can I read a paragraph from your book?
Okay.
Mary Frances, called Shorty, was known for her days in the hayfields as well. She was pulling a hay rake with a cranky old tractor that wouldn't start. Felt the call of nature and didn't want to turn off the engine, so she hopped off the tractor. The tractor kept on going down the furrow. After taking care of business, she ran as fast as she could, caught up with the tractor, and drove on.
That's the reason the mowers tried to get along with the Baileys or stay out of their way. I mean, they
Could you tell us about the stringer squirrel gun?
Okay. My grandmother, when I was 14 years old, I was reading in Malachi, the last book in the Old Testament, last two verses, where it says, "Before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, I will send you Elijah the prophet." And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers. And I prayed about that. What does that mean? You know. And then after that, I had a tremendous urge to learn about my fathers. So I interviewed my grandfathers and grandmothers. And when I interviewed my grandmother, Stringer, I asked, at 14, I asked the right questions, I guess, because I said, "Where was you born?" She said, "Thailand, Livingston County." And she told me stories about going down to Gun Springs and getting water loads. And then I said, "Who was your daddy?" And she said, "William Henry Stringer." And I said, "What do you remember about him?" And she said, "I remember when I was real young, 3, 4, he used to take me squirrel hunting." And I said, she said, "I remember the gun he had." And we've got that gun today. I got a picture of it in the book here, in the Moore family collection, that I had Drew investigate that book. Can you tell us a little bit about that gun, Connecticut?
That's a Crescent Arms gun out of Connecticut. It was pre-Crescent Arms. I can't recall right on top of my head what the name of the company was. About 1870s is when that gun was manufactured, like 1870s. It's a double barrel, double hammer shotgun.
Okay, and what they done, Drew told me, is people would order from them, they might order 25 or 50, and if they wanted them to, they'd put the name of the gun shop on there. But this one probably come to the Smithland gun shop, and then he purchased that in Smithland, and that's how that gun wound up. And
Yeah, those were called trade guns. They would purchase them in lots. And this one here had Washington Arms stamped on the receiver, or engraved in the receiver. But around the country there would be different names of that same gun.
yeah.
And it had the old metal butt plate on it and Fort Back line. It was just not good.
And what was your question again?
Well, you answered it. I want you to talk about this squirrel gun.
Okay, the squirrel gun, okay.
And expanded a bit on why you became interested in your genealogy, and it was at a young age, which unfortunately for many of us it happens when we're older and the folks that know
Yeah.
the stories are gone.
And then what I done, I interviewed all of them when I was 14, and I kept that information. Then when I was 16 and got my driver's license, I drove to Smithland Courthouse. I drove to the different courthouses and investigated what my grandparents had told me. And so I started when I was 14 years old, and now I'm 84, and it took me 70 years to write the book. Now, I collected all that information. When I sat down at the Microsoft 360, I done it in about 8 months probably. But I spent a lot of time trying to collect information in genealogy, and there's no telling how many mistakes I made. I had people proofread the book. I mean, Shorty and them would proofread it, and different people would proofread the book, and we'd find things. Then Allison Evans up at the Critney County Press, I had her read it and see if she could find errors, and punctuation and spelling, all that. That 360, it didn't like a lot of the words, like Katoa and Simpsonia. He didn't want me to spell it like they're really spelled. I thought, well, that's signs on the side of the road. I said, that's what it is. And then, when I talked about my dad, Joe Moore, he wanted to own all the land that joined him. And he told us, he said, is this so much ground being made and ain't no more, and it's a good investment? And I said, Dad, that ain't right. It's more ground being made. And he said, where? There's more ground being made. I said, well, like a volcano in the ocean, like Kilauea and Hawaii, it's adding 5 acres every year. Man, he looked at me like he had, and I said, okay, that's a good investment. But when I tried to spell Kilauea, I couldn't even get close enough at the microphone. Somebody finally told me how to spell Kilauea. And any other questions?
I've got one. My great-great-great-grandfather was Alexander McDonald, and I haven't been able to find back beyond him. And I understand you have information about the McDonalds going back past Alexander.
Yeah. It's in the book. It goes all the way back to Scotland, and of course, he went to Alexander McDonald, I think, Leslie did, but then it goes on back to Scotland, and it gets into the knights in shining armor and a lot of stuff, back in the King days, but it'll. In the book, it takes them on back.
Can you tell us a little bit about Alexander? I think they call him Squire, didn't they? Squire McDonald, about his military history.
Yeah, he was, he fought in the war of, the battle with Mexico, And he talks about leaving from the dark forest, and the fighting those battles, all the way across. And he got hit in Achilles' heel, and he couldn't stand up. He was injured there, and he was sent home. And then later on, probably about 35, he joined the Union Army and was stationed at Dover, I think, Dover, Tennessee.
Page 289 talks about the McDonald's.
What?
Page 289 talks about the McDonald's.
289. Okay. And he was Squire McDonald. Of course, Yeah, they had land grants probably when they came into Livingston County, these people that fought in the wars, the Jackson Purchase, in 1819 from the Chickasaws. And anything before that, the Spanish-American War, 1812 Revolutionary War, they could exercise those land warrants coming in here in Jackson Purchase. Isaac Shelby and Andrew Jackson negotiated with Mingo down in Tupelo, Mississippi, and come up with an agreement as, $4 million and another amount of money, and it took about 5 or 6 years. But the Chickasaw departure was a more orderly departure to Oklahoma than the Cherokees was. That was a rushed thing. A lot of them died, Mount Rock, Tricosan, Ohio River, a lot of deaths. But Mingo was a very intelligent chief, and he lived to be almost 104. And when they negotiated that down in Tupelo, Mississippi, some people, some of them call it the Tupelo Accords, others the Jackson Purchase. But I tried to tie in the local people that I know of. It was a preacher in Von Shelton Church. I done his genealogy about 10 years ago. It was an Ordway. And I looked at his genealogy, and he was tied into John Ordway. And I knew John Ordway served on the Lewis and Clark expedition. And, they left St. Louis. They started collecting supplies and everything about 1803, about 1805. They started out on that expedition, and of course Thomas Jefferson was getting that together, and what he was doing was trying to facilitate the Louisiana Purchase, is what he was doing there, making that chart and all that, and making that was a big part of the United States that come into that. I think $11 million is what he paid for it, and there's a lot of farms in Livingston County bring more than that now. Marshall County wouldn't. And of course the famous, and I didn't, a normal book is 60,000 words. Mine wound up 122,000, and took more than 2 books. And I wanted to write a lot more about the Shoshone Indian, Sacagawea, that went on that expedition with him and had that baby, Teepee, and she was married to John Baptiste Carbeau, a French trapper. And she helped him a lot on that expedition, dealing with the Indians and everything. And she was a Shoshone from the land of the Shining Mountains, she called it, And my wife passed away about 7 years ago, but we got 7 children. And I used to kid her about that, after that. She'd talk about, cramps, getting ready to have another baby, And I said, now, wait a minute. Then I tell her the story about Sacagawea. What she done is just drop back a mile or 2 and delivered. They used to hold a tree and just kind of squat down. Then they had those medicine bags, they could take care of themselves, towels, the pillows and all that. Then she'd catch up with them. I said, you can't tell me. It's look what Sacagawea. No, I didn't. I couldn't. I couldn't push that too hard. But Sacagawea I know a lot about, but I just didn't have her own. I think she wound up on the Wind River reservation in Wyoming and probably died there. She later married an Indian, I guess you had enough of the French trapper, you know, but, and his name was Jerkmeat. Jerkmeat, I guess jerking meat off of a carcass or something, you know, but that was the name. But I could have wrote a lot about her, but I don't know if it takes 70 years to write another, and I may not make it. Well, y'all probably, you got another program here, so we need to close out. I appreciate it. I ain't gonna ask for another question. I probably can't answer. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.